It's telling me now that this bad behavior that this person is engaging in with me, this is not going to change.
You're listening to the Minimalist Podcast with Joshua Fields Milburn and TK Coleman.
Thank you, Malabama. Hello, everybody. Today on the show, we are joined by Dr. Ramani Durvasula to talk about minimizing narcissism. Dr. Ramani is a licensed clinical psychologist, professor emerita of psychology at California State University, Los Angeles, and she is the author of several books, including this brand new publication, It's Not You: Identifying and Healing from Narcissistic People. Coming up on this free public minimal episode, a caller has a question about how to know whether or not someone is a narcissist. And another listener has a question about the best ways to tell narcissists that they need to seek help. Then we've got our lightning round segment, a FAM's question, and a listener tip for you. You can check out the full 2-hour maximal edition of episode 431, where we answer 5 times the questions, and we dive deep into several simple living segments. That private podcast episode is out right now at patreon.com/theminimalist, or just click the link down in the description. Your support keeps our podcast 100% advertisement free because, say it with me, y'all, advertisements suck. Let's start with our callers. If you have a question or a comment for our show, we'd love to hear from you. Give us a call, 406-219-7839, or email a voice recording to podcast@theminimalists.com. Our first question today is from Natalie.
Hello, this is Natalie from Mississippi. I've been a fan for about 6 years now. And my question is, how do you know someone is a narcissist when the term is used so frequently today by people who just throw the word around because they don't like somebody or they had a disagreement or something? How do you know someone truly is?
Doctor, this question is very intriguing to me because, for the most part, the word narcissist plays no role in my vocabulary. I've never found it useful to invoke that term in my efforts to deal with people. I tend to focus on, hey, how are things going? What are the boundaries that I need to set? And so on. However, I don't judge people who use it. I just don't relate to the use of it. And I'm curious to hear from you. Why do we need this word? Do you think it's overused? And what is the context within which it actually does make sense to invoke it?
Okay, so we desperately need it, and yes, it's overused. So why do we need it? If I showed up to your house with an egg, you would not tell me I was bringing you a cake. Okay? So you'd be like, okay, but thanks for the egg. So why is that? Because it's an ingredient. Now, if I mixed it up with flour and baking soda and sugar and butter and all that stuff and stuck it in an oven, I brought you a cake. But if I brought you an egg, I brought you an egg. So when we look at something like narcissism, it's made up of all these pieces: lack of empathy, entitlement, grandiosity, arrogance, the need for admiration and validation, a selfishness, a need for control. And it shows up as manipulativeness. It shows up as gaslighting. It shows up as minimizing, as dismissiveness, in some cases even contempt, betrayal, lying. And these patterns are chronic. It's not just an egg. It's not just selfishness. And I think that we do need the word, because the word captures this thing that hangs together. You wouldn't want to list the ingredients of a cake every time you had a cake. You're like, this is cake, right? Yeah. It cuts to the chase. But if you don't understand all the ingredients, people often use it as this person's just in love with themselves, which is actually the opposite of narcissism. So we need the word, and I'll tell you why also, because when we understand how this all hangs together, we have a word to describe it, but it also has some dynamics to it. For example, it doesn't really change. So it's telling me now that this bad behavior that this person is engaging in with me, this is not going to change. So there's nothing I'm going to be able to do to fix it. I'm not going to blame myself, and I might want to find a way to disengage from this. That's why the word becomes important. But yes, we're overusing it. Most people, in fact, about 20, 25 years ago, if anyone used it, it was sort of, this is a person who stares in the mirror all the time, right? Or is very vain. That's how we used to use it, right? Now everyone's using it. I think that the election in 2016 changed the game. And so everybody started using the word then. And that now, then when TikTok and Instagram ran with it, hell no. And then it really became about, my boyfriend cheated on me. He's a narcissist. I said, honey, your boyfriend cheated on you. You're hurt. And I get that. But I don't know that he's a narcissist. Just because someone cheats, they're not narcissistic. Just because somebody is a jerk, they're not narcissistic. Just because somebody is interrupting you, they're not narcissistic. Now, let's spend some time with them and let's look for these other patterns. And it really, to me, narcissism is really about the behavior, because that's what affects us. Sure, we can talk about the lack of empathy, the entitlement, all that laundry list I gave you, but ultimately it's how it shows up. And the way it shows up harms us. That's why we need the word. And let me tell you, you're one lucky dude that you have not needed this word.
Well, does that mean I'm a narcissist?
No, it doesn't. Lucky. It means you're lucky. And there are some people out there who are lucky, because a lot of folks listening to this are saying, well, no, this has been happening to me since the day I was born. It was my parent, and then it was my, it was my sibling, or then it was my partner, or it was my spouse, it was my boss. When it's happened to you, you know it. Some people either didn't know that this was what the word was, or it didn't bother them as much. There's a certain privilege in being sort of isolated from it. It happens. I mean, listen, it's probably about 1 in 6 people. So you might be one in a very small group of fortunate folks. Most people I know have been affected by it, but this is what I do. So of course I'm going to know that.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. One, I might just be a mean guy, since I've always used the word jerk to refer to those people. Maybe I need to upgrade my language to talk about it more scientifically. But I'm getting 2 things out of what you're saying. One is, never abandon something that is useful merely because it is misused. And clearly the word narcissist is misused, but that doesn't mean we should run in the opposite direction and commit the opposite extreme. And the second thing is, it benefits you to know when a problem can't be fixed. It's sort of like, when you take your car to the mechanic, there's a difference between him saying, oh, you need some work on the engine, versus him saying, this is total and it can't be recovered.
That's right.
And narcissism is a way of thinking about situations in the latter category.
Right. But people view that as dismissive, right? So this is your mother. This is your spouse of 30 years. Heck, this is even your adult child. It feels very dismissive and disloyal to say, well, my mom's a narcissist, so I'm not going to engage with her anymore. Wow. It's a pretty simple take on it. It might mean engaging differently, but the reason the book is called It's Not You is I really wish people would stop personalizing it as a minimum. Somebody else is behaving like a jerk. There's nothing you can do on your side to change their jerkiness. So proceed accordingly.
Let's talk about that, because when people misuse the term, as you just alluded to, it often becomes this thought-terminating cliche.
Yeah.
He's a narcissist, so I've dismissed that person. As you just said, well, my boyfriend cheated on me. He's a narcissist. It's a great way to dismiss them, to label someone in a way that is dismissive, that actually shuts down the conversation. But what we're having today is an actual conversation about what a narcissist is. And therefore, I have a question. And that question is, aren't we all on some level narcissistic?
No, we're not. And I'll tell you why. Hell no, and not me. Maybe you.
Hey, I love how you just real firm with that. That's all.
No, there's a real debate about this idea of healthy narcissism or ubiquitous narcissism, right? We all have some in us. What you've got to understand is that even if some of us have a selfish day, right? Today I'm going to do the things I need to do. If you have intact empathy, you might communicate that to people ahead of time. Like, hey, I'm going sort of off the grid today. I've got like 2 days of work to do on a deadline. I've taken care of my stuff, but I'm not going to be in touch. And I'm just letting you know that. That's empathic. That's an empathic awareness that there's other people affected by you just sort of going and taking the time you need to do what you need to do. I would not call that person narcissistic. I mean, if a person kept doing that every weekend, even if they prepared everything, I might say that's a little selfish. Selfish and narcissistic. Selfish is the egg. Narcissistic is the cake. Right. And so I think that this challenge really becomes that, no, we're not all a little narcissistic, because most people, really most, have intact empathy, are compassionate, care about other people, check in with them. Sure, we don't always get it right, but when healthy people make an interpersonal mistake, They apologize and make true amends. So very quickly, like, let's say you do say something abrupt that's hurtful, and you're like, that was not cool. And you might pick up the phone and say, hey, I said something and I'm so sorry. And I could see I hurt you, and I take responsibility for that. I am so, so sorry. You don't say, I'm sorry you feel that way. You don't deflect. You don't blame the other person. So no, I actually don't think, I think some of us can be selfish at times. I think there's times when our empathy might be not as good as it could be. And there might be times we're frustrated at Starbucks because our order isn't the first one. Like, how come I have to wait so long? We've all had that, how come I have to wait so long moment. Yeah. And then some of us will say, okay, I'm being a jerk. But if you do that every time you go to the coffee shop, that's a problem. We're looking for patterns. We all have moments when we're not graceful, but we typically course correct or we make amends. That's what I'm saying, is that most of us are not narcissistic, and I don't buy this idea of healthy narcissism. There's no such thing as a healthy lack of empathy.
And how does that relate to solipsism? Because that's how I often use that term, like the solipsist next door, or I'm the center of the universe, right? I think those two terms often become interchangeable. And so the person who is, we're all self-centered to some degree, right? I mean, we almost by necessity because of our senses. Yeah. I look through my eyes, I touch through my hands, and I smell through my nose. So it is my own sensory experience. Sure. But that doesn't mean I necessarily am a narcissist or that I think I'm the center of the universe. No, you're arguing it, though, very reductionistically, right? I am senses and all that. But we are, at the end of the day, a social species. Hominid species, like primates, evolved socially. We need other people. It's why people share our memories. It's like everyone sort of had their own sort of memory bank that's like iCloud, because that you have a wife that shares memory. You have family members that share memories. And that's why you remember something and she doesn't, and vice versa, right? Because we're a social species. To maintain a social connection, you need to have awareness of another person. So even though we have our own internalized sensory experiences, and we could argue things like William James and all of that, the sense of self, the way the self is held. But we also have to look at those early theorists and philosophers. They were also referring to an outside environment that we react to. How we react matters. Can you tell me about self-righteousness and its role in narcissism? Is self-righteousness a low-grade form of narcissism? Is it an ingredient or something else?
So self-righteous, there's actually a form of narcissism that I've actually termed self-righteous narcissism. Back in the old days, we used to call it anancastic personality style. It shows up as a rigid morality, a judgmental quality, a sense of, I know what's right and I'm going to follow my rigid order and rules. Tend to be workaholics. That's what it's a work above all else. It almost feels sort of Calvinistic or puritanical. But here's the thing. To the detriment of others. So when another person is struggling, let's say you have a family member that struggled with mental health issues, right? The self-righteous narcissist would say, well, I'm not the cause of those problems and I work very hard and you haven't been working as hard as me. So I don't see any need to help you. So if it's 4 months until you get to be seen at the clinic, then it's 4 months. Or the self-righteous narcissist will say, I said dinner began at 6. And you come at 6:20, kind of late like I did today. You come at 6:20 because of the traffic, right? And they'll say, I'm sorry, you came late. Dinner's done. At this home, we eat dinner on time. That's what that self-righteous narcissism is. It's punitive, it's judgmental, and it's I am above everyone. I am morally better than everyone. And as a result of that, there's a dismissiveness and a lack of awareness that not everyone has the same circumstances.
I know we'll get into this more as we go along, but I'm just going to put on the table one of the areas where you're really challenging my worldview to the core in a way that I already feel uncomfortable, but in a very good way. And that is, I have found it to be very useful to treat everyone as if the possibility for change is real. That if it's the right person or the right way to reach them, the right way to interact with them, there's a way to bring out the best in them. And you're right. It does feel dismissive to say this person is narcissistic. And if what you're saying is true, and I believe you make your case very well, then that means there are some people that you either got to walk away from or put up a hard boundary and say, I opt out of trying to exercise positive influence in your life because you are beyond change. I want to deepen my understanding of that. How much of that gets done in this show, we'll see. I know we've got some more things to talk about, but this is really uncomfortable for me. That's a really tough pill to swallow. Yeah.
I want to talk to you about complaining really quickly. Is that an ingredient in narcissism?
So complaining, this is a great example of one of those overgeneralized behaviors that everyone does, right? But then it becomes quantity and consistency, right? So the complaint that feels more entitled. Why am I having to endure something? Everyone else is enduring it. You see this in airports all the time. Why am I having to wait? I'm like, homie, everyone in here is on this flight that's delayed, okay? Why am I having to, and they'll do that everywhere. From, again, the coffee shop to the airport to the hotel. Why am I not getting a suite? Because you didn't pay for a suite, right? So that when the complaining is embedded in the entitlement, we're more in the realm of narcissistic complaining. I think that some people might have more of a negativistic bent, so they complain a lot. That's almost getting wedged into another, like, sort of geography of personality. There's just some people who complain and complain. It could be actually correlated with depression. It could be correlated with what we call the negativistic personality style. There's overlaps with narcissism. But those folks may not necessarily have all the other stuff, the grandiosity and the arrogance. They just complain a lot. Now, a complaining person is difficult to spend time with, to your earlier point, right? However, if you can give feedback to that complaining person and say, hey, all this complaining, you're really putting a wedge between yourself and everyone else. You keep talking about how lonely you are. All you do is complain. Let's work on that. And they'll say, oh my gosh, I never thought about that. Like, I learned this. I'm going to work on this. That person who says, I never meant to hurt everyone with this, that's not a narcissist.
Right.
That's a person who complains a lot. And that willingness to sort of plumb the depths of their soul, do that deep dive into like, yeah, that's not okay. I'm hurting other people. I'm going to work on this. And then they do their little cognitive behavior rubber band on the wrist and snap it when they complain or take feedback. Great. But the person who's like, how dare you tell me that? Like, I'm a really important person and I have a lot going on and they're making me wait. And then they start screaming at you because how dare you call them a complainer? Narcissistic. There's a difference.
Yeah. What about comparison? Because in our culture, we are almost rewarded to compare ourselves to others.
Yeah.
Obviously, advertisers and corporations want us to compare ourselves so that we feel inadequate, so we buy their products and services. And maybe there's a healthy form of competition. I like watching NBA games. And that's one type of comparison. I look at the Utah Jazz versus the Chicago Bulls, and the final score is a type of comparison, right? But we're so conditioned to compare everything in our lives. Is that a potential trait of a narcissist?
It can be, very much so. So narcissistic, built into sort of the model of narcissism, is envying other people or believing that other people envy them. So there's a covetousness to this personality style. I want what they have. I want more. Why do they have that? Why don't I have that? It's a lot of that. Now, remember, the narcissistic person's personality is predicated on referencing outside of themselves. A healthy human being references internally, right? Who am I? What am I about? Like, yeah, no, I don't need that car. I got a car that works fine, and I'd actually put my money into whatever matters to me because that's what matters to me. For the narcissistic person, they're saying, what are other people saying is cool? Right? Oh, that's cool. So the game changed. I'll never forget the day I was sitting at home and somebody said, there's this thing called Facebook, Rom. Have you checked it out? I remember I was a mom of young children at the time, and it was late at night, and I looked like, what is this? And I was already studying narcissism, and I felt sick. I'm like, oh my God, these fools are going to be able to get narcissism without leaving the house. We're screwed. And we're screwed.
Well, I do want to talk about that. In fact, we could talk about it now. Let's talk about the amplification of narcissism by way of social media.
So this is where it gets interesting. And in fact, it is amplified. So in other words, people keep saying, has social media created narcissism? And the answer to that is no. Narcissism is a social and developmental phenomenon. Those wheels start churning when someone's a child into adolescence, right? You don't create it. You can't take a 30-year-old and make them narcissistic, right? They might become a jerk, but if the core of them is decent, you'll get them back to decency, right?
Really quickly, what about like the Hollywood trope where someone becomes like a star, they're accustomed to getting special treatment, and then in their 30s, they become a do you know who I am type of person?
If they're not narcissistic, you're going to be able to walk them down. You'll be like,
Gotcha.
yo, no. It
They
doesn't
might
work
need to
like
be
this.
called out,
They
but
need
they're
to be
responsive
called
to
out,
it.
right? But
Yeah.
they're surrounded by this coterie of people. I mean, the question is how much of that treatment could any of us go through and us not become a jerk? I wouldn't mind the experiment and trying to find out, but so to your point though is that this whole idea of comparison. It's interesting because I think it's taken the narcissism problem, it's blown it up, it hasn't created it, but it's given the grandiose narcissistic folks a megaphone, right? And so they're just talking, and we've rewarded it. So grandiose narcissistic people are now making money off of it because they're so obsessed with followers and likes, and that's sort of the blood that goes through their veins, and they get paid for that because then they get like all these brand deals and all of that. So narcissism's being rewarded, but there's a dark side to this equation. And this is where we go into, and this is where a lot of theoreticians are increasingly believing that this idea of social comparison, while one version is the grandiose megaphone screamer, the other version is the angry, sullen, resentful, how come other people have more than I have? I'm going to make the world pay for this. And here's where we have the internet troll. Most of whom are what we call vulnerable narcissists. This is a form of narcissism that's not the pretentious, preening, arrogant, look at me, I'm so great. It's instead a petulant, sullen, resentful, victimized, failure to launch. How come I didn't get mine? I'm so much better than the other guy. And what the internet has done is basically showing these people that, that person actually is cooler than you. And there's this seething rage. That's why you see this cruelty in online spaces. That's the vulnerable narcissism. I actually think that's the problem that's been made worse.
And I think a lot of those
internet.
people are probably part of the dark triad, which I want to talk to you a bit about on the Maximal. But I do want to get to another question. First, Natalie, let me send you a copy of It's Not You. We'll get you the book, the print book, or if you want the ebook or the audiobook, we'd be happy to send that to you as well. Our next question is also from someone named Natalie.
Hi, my name is Natalie from Sydney, Australia. I am a Patreon subscriber. I have a narcissistic relative that is oblivious to his own comments and behavior towards others. I've gone to therapy to work out if I am the issue in our relationship, but ultimately I learnt tools and strategies to control my anxiety when I'm around this person. My question is, what is a kind way to tell narcissistic people they have a problem or that they should seek some help? Thank you for everything that you do. Bye.
First of all, to Natalie, it's not you. Okay, so she's saying I got anxious because that's exactly where that title came from. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Natalies out there, right? So
Two so far on this episode.
right? There you go. All you narcissistically abused Natalies, please come out. But it's what I love about Natalie's question is one thing she talks about is some of the management. I have now tools to control my anxiety of being with this oblivious person where Natalie was blaming herself, which is a classical issue for people in these relationships. But now she goes to the punchline, which is how do we tell them? You tell the narcissist they've got an issue the same way you hug a porcupine, really, really carefully and prepare for it to hurt really badly.
Wow.
So I actually don't know that it's ever a good. First of all, number one, if you only take one thing out of this episode, only one thing, never call a narcissist out as a narcissist. Biggest mistake you'll ever make because they're going to come at you with 10 times the vitriol. They will be, how dare you call me narcissistic? I am the best. I treat you so well. I have been so good to you. Everyone tells me I'm the best. You know who the narcissist is? You. You have no empathy. And then before they're done, by the time they're done, you're like, oh, maybe I am the narcissist. So there's no point. Because telling them that is they're not going to say, well, thanks for making sense of why I've been so mean to you. Let me go call that local friendly therapist and get this worked out. Okay? That's not going to happen. So when I hear a story like this, you can see her. This is somebody who remained in this relationship. That obliviousness is part of the dismissiveness, the neglect, the interpersonal neglect. That's such a part of narcissism related to a phenomenon called breadcrumbing. You learn to go by on less and less. You blame yourself. If you're lucky, you stop blaming yourself. But then you're like, can this person be helped, right? One thing that narcissistic people lack is something called self-reflective capacity. They lack the ability to look inward and say, ooh, that wasn't very nice what I just did. They just don't have it. That's that lack of empathy coming into action. And so in therapy, they're not great candidates. I've worked with a lot of narcissistic folks in my practice. We can only get so far. right? We can get the ball about 2/3, maybe not even a third of the way down the court, and that's it. We're stuck. They'll often drop out when you push them too hard. So I think in this particular case, I always tell folks, like, if you want to do this, but you have to be prepared that the blowback is going to be awful. They are going to call you names. They are going to gaslight you. They're going to tell you you're the problem. They're going to go after your vulnerabilities. So if you're up for that, go for it. But there's no version of this where you give them that feedback and they're nice about it. You can point out individual behaviors. You could say, hey, it's you're not paying attention to me. You know what they're going to say? Yeah, I am. What's your problem? Like, I pay lots of attention to you. Maybe if you weren't so needy, that's gaslighting. So there's no winning at this. So I'd say to Natalie, you're doing a great job. You really are. But that last bit, I think that healing is less about letting them know that there's something up with them and you continuing on the track you are, managing your anxiety, doing the workarounds in this relationship. But usually the only way a narcissistic person will go into therapy from a relationship is scorched earth. A person says, we're done, like I'm out. And the narcissistic person says, no, I'll go into therapy. But even then, they're often dangling it. We call it future faking to keep the person in the relationship, but they don't actually do meaningful work. Or they get a coach who tells them they're great.
That's one thing I wanted to ask you about. You talk about that responsiveness to being corrected or receiving constructive feedback as one of the hallmarks of the non-narcissist. But how deep can maybe performative empathy go? There are some people who I can think of that might be good candidates for this.
Why is he looking at me?
Everything isn't about you, man. See, that proves you're a narcissist. I wasn't even thinking about you.
It's not me.
Oh, gosh.
Well, I'll write a follow-up book called It's Not Me to help all the narcissists feel better about themselves.
And that one will sell twice as much,
That's
right?
going to be my response to her book. It's not me.
I should have sold it with a second cover so people can hide it from their narcissistic spouses.
That's so funny. So, I mean, can a narcissist cry? Can a narcissist perhaps receive constructive feedback and genuinely feel like, oh no, I can't believe I hurt you, but then just go back to doing the same thing?
I think the difference is I think they can hear feedback, but those tears are more likely to either A, be crocodile tears and a manipulation to get everyone off their back, or B, a manifestation of the shame they feel in that moment because they're not being viewed as a good person. Does that make sense? So it's not so much I've hurt another person. There may be a little of that. I mean, they're not psychopathic. And there may be like, ooh, I hurt this person. But if there's something called the rubber band theory of personality, and the argument in the rubber band theory of personality is that if you take a rubber band, you can stretch it, but you got to hold it. If you put the rubber band down, it's going to return to its original size. So maybe in that moment where it's very clear, it's glaringly clear that the narcissistic person has hurt someone and they're having a strong show of emotion like crying, that they'll say, ooh, I did a bad thing, but you put the rubber band down and they're going to go back to how they've always done things. So the return to baseline. Remember this about personality, okay? This is a very important thing to remember because I think in a way we're putting the narcissistic folks in a really tricky hot seat, right? I have a personality, you've got one, she's got one, they've got one, right? And if you've, again, good exercise is to figure out what your personality is really about. I've done that, to the deepest level. So I know who I am and what I'm about personality-wise. And I'm sort of what we call an agreeable introvert. That's Dr. Ramani's personality. I'm tender-minded and humble and helpful and ethical and I worry about other people a lot. And I keep to myself. Like that's me, right? So if somebody said to me, hey, Ramani, we're going to have you go into therapy because it would be so much better for your career if you're a lot more extroverted and like you kind of learn to work people a little bit more because you're just sitting there and you're not getting as far as you could, right? So we're going to turn Dr. Ramani into a disagreeable extrovert. Good luck with that. Maybe I could go into a meeting and be like, yeah, well, I want this book, blah, 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 and then I'd throw up afterwards or I'd feel sick or I'd feel upset. It wouldn't feel congruent. It wouldn't feel my nature. For the narcissistic person, it's also their personality is their personality. And the difference is maladaptive personalities like narcissism are more rigid. The healthier a person is, the more flexible they are. in all of us, our mental health. And it's like, how people stretch their muscles and do Pilates and yoga. The equivalent of that in mental health is mental flexibility. And people are mentally flexible, live longer. They're more resilient in the face of mental health. Narcissistic people are not mentally flexible. Many times the people in relationships with them, look at Natalie. I figured out the workarounds. I worked through the anxiety, are flexible. They're not, so they're even less likely to change. But most of us can't really change our personalities that much. The only times we see big personality change is head injuries or major trauma. I don't know that I would want to do that to someone. And for the narcissistic person, the thing they're trying to keep at bay is their shame and their insecurity, and they're not in touch with that. So they're not clear why they're doing what they're doing. And if you try to point it out to them, they will rage at you. So the conversation's always getting stopped.
So getting back to Natalie's question specifically, I love the porcupine analogy because if you see a porcupine, you don't hug it. You don't tell it it's a porcupine. You walk away. And so maybe one of the kindest things you can do is walk away from that relationship. And I say kind, maybe it's kind to the narcissist that you're in the relationship with, or maybe it's simply being loving and kind to yourself. And maybe it's also being loving and kind to the people around you, because I don't know about you, especially I'm also an extreme introvert. So is TK, but when I am around other people a long time, it's not that my personality changes necessarily, but I don't show up as the best version of myself if I'm steeped in people all day, every day. And so if you're steeped in this narcissist's company all day, every day, it's hard to be loving to the other people around you.
Yes, it is. It's very hard to be loving to other people because you are, listen, even the most mentally disciplined person can say, it's not me, this isn't about me. But if someone's coming at you all the time, minimizing, oh, you're not that sick, or stop talking about that, or simply don't look at you when they're talking to you, they just almost have contempt, or they betray you. You can only show up as your best self for so long under those conditions. And the problem is most people tend to turn inward and blame themselves for the dynamic. That's one of the key issues that comes up. But what you're talking about is actually a piece of guidance I've given throughout my books, which is the sort of that twist on Voltaire, which is tend to your own garden. Like, keep your side of the street clean. Be good to others. Build out social supports. I always use the 90-10 rule. I say we give 90% of ourselves to the most toxic people in our lives and 10% to the good folks. Flip the damn math. Give 90% to the good folks where it's a reciprocal, beautiful relationship, and then just give 10%. Phone it in with the toxic folks. They're not listening anyhow.
Come on.
That's a really good point. So do narcissists attract other narcissists, or generally are they attracting non-narcissists?
So keep this in mind about narcissistic folks. They're charming, charismatic, they are confident, they're attractive, they make more money, they're more successful at dating, they're more represented in leadership. So according to the checklist model, everybody wants to be near them. So they attract everybody. Now, who are they attracted to? Narcissistic people are attracted to people they find attractive, who have social status. That might be money, education, credentials, who can do something for them, who have connections, and who give them supply. So that's what they're drawn to. People give them admiration and praise, right? So all of us would fall into that too, unless we're not attractive or we don't have social status or something like that. However, what happens when a narcissist attracts a narcissist, and it happens all the time, is that the other narcissistic person is very attractive to the narcissistic person. They too have status and attractiveness and all the things that they want. And then they get together and it's really hot for a while, because they'll have hot sex and they'll love bomb each other. And it's all very exciting and it's all very Instagrammable. But when it goes off the rails, it's volatile and ugly. I always say, let the two narcissistic people get together. Just don't let them reproduce, because it's a real hellscape for the children.
What you're saying is very encouraging at one level, because when you look at people who get conned or get played, there's a tendency to say, how could I have been such an idiot? And what you're saying is, if you're attracted to narcissists, you're just like the rest of
Everyone
us,
is.
because they generally tend to be very charming. So that's encouraging and can kind of take some of the pressure off. And it's one of the layers of it's not you. The other thing that's kind of tricky, though, is with a lot of other conditions that we need to change or negotiate, there's a clear cause and effect where we look at the condition and we say it leads to failure. So that motivates us. But it seems like narcissists, tend to win in all of the ways
Yes.
that we celebrate in the world. So it may be even harder to see.
Absolutely. They do tend to win. And again, it goes back to a comment you were making earlier about this idea of, we do live in a capitalist economy, and narcissistic people are the ultimate capitalists, right? Because they want to win. They're very competitive. They like hierarchies. Like it all works for them. So and remember, success for them is a source of supply. So they will unrelentingly go for success. They don't care who they have to hurt, who they have to throw under the bus. They're going to get it because it's supply for them, but then that attracts people to them. And so what we need to do is sort of rewrite our paradigms and get away from the charm, charisma, confidence, success sort of checklist model and really have people reflect on, do I feel respected? Do I feel safe? Does this feel compassionate? Does this feel empathic? The fairy tales aren't about that. They're about who's flashy and has got a castle. Versus like some ordinary dude with some empathy.
Not how do I feel about you when I'm in your presence, but how do I feel about me? Oh, man. Come on, Doc. Oh, man.
Welcome back, y'all. TK, that was an outstanding conversation.
Yes, it was.
Wow.
That's an understatement.
It's the first time I've walked away from a conversation thinking, maybe I'm not a narcissist.
Oh, my gosh. I walked away thinking like, maybe I do work with a narcissist. He has all the signs.
I mean, how could someone with hair like this not be at least a little bit narcissistic?
She did say if you're really attracted to them and charmed by them,
Yeah, we got to move on. We got some more to talk about here. Alabama, what time is it?
You know what time it is. It's time for the lightning round, where we answer your questions from TikTok.
Yes, indeed. You can follow The Minimalist on all the platforms at The Minimalist. During the lightning round, this is where we each have 60 seconds to answer your question with a short, shareable, less than 140 character response. We call them minimal maxims. We put these minimal maxims in the show notes so you can copy and share our pithy answers on social media if you like. You can find all those minimal maxims now at minimalmaxims.com and in the show notes at theminimalists.com/podcast. And by the way, we'll also, I feel like the Micro Machine man right now. This is all off the top of the dome, TK.
Wow.
You can get the show notes in your inbox every Monday. We'll send you all of our minimal maxims each week to start your week off with a bite-sized bit of simplicity. Today's question from TikTok is from Lily and Elvis.
How do you let go of your emotions if your feelings are tied directly to your ego?
Well, TK, you are the author of Emotional Clutter, which folks can download for free at our website, theminimalists.com/emotional clutter. You got something pithy for them?
Yeah, if your feelings are tied to your ego, you can learn to untie them. There are many things in life that look, sound, or even in some cases feel normal, but that doesn't make them necessarily natural. Normalcy is about what's socially acceptable, what conforms with what everyone else is doing. Natural is about what is optimal given the design. And in the course of a lifetime, we learn to hook our psychological wagon to many things that are unworthy of us, many things that take us places we don't want to be. We learn to base our emotions on the price of Bitcoin. Number go up, I feel good. Number go down, I don't feel so good. Whether or not someone likes my shoes or likes me, how many YouTube views I have. And a lot of these things look, sound, and feel normal, but they're not natural. That's not how we are designed. And you can learn to unlearn that process. In the same way that we're conditioned to attach ourselves, you can learn how to detach from that and ground your psychological experience in something deeper, like your capacity for self-awareness, self-honesty, self-respect, and so on.
I would say that letting go begins where the clinging ends. Quite often, we experience this emotional clutter because we're so clinging to those emotions. I feel sad, I feel sad, I feel sad, I feel sad, I feel... Wait a minute. If I just watch the sadness and I don't pathologize it, I feel sad, which must mean I feel bad. No, I just feel sad right now. Let me watch that. Let me stop clinging to it and just look at it for a moment. That's where the letting go begins, whether it's with a material possession, whether it is with the emotions you're experiencing, or if it's even with narcissism. We had this beautiful conversation with Dr. Ramani. I mean, that thing was, with her, you got to check out the full private podcast, the Maximal episode, because we answered so many questions with her. By the way, Patreon's doing the free trials now, so you can just go there and check out the episode 7-day free trial over on Patreon. There's such a deep dive. The questions we answered with her about narcissistic parents and narcissistic self-care and all of these other areas of narcissism. And it helped me better understand that everyone has ingredients for narcissism, which we talked about in the very first question, but that doesn't make everyone a narcissist. And it helped me better identify what is narcissism, what is the dark triad, what's solipsism, what is sadism, what is Machiavellianism, and all of these different things that they are useful labels if we actually understand what they are. Right here, right now, let's answer another question here in a moment. But first, real quick for right here, right now, here's one thing that's going on in the life of the minimalists. Well, I teach a writing class. Well, Professor Sean and I teach a writing class. It's called How to Write Better, and just teach us a couple times a year online. It's a 4-week writing class. You can take it at your own pace, though. It usually takes 4 weeks. I've had people take it over 16 weeks, however you want to take it. It's learn at your own pace. But I've published 5 books, 4 of which are bestsellers, and I really show you my recipe of how I learned to write better. And it really is that. It is a recipe. What are some of the texts that I've used? I've funneled through many of the texts. What do I understand about composition versus editing and the publishing process? Forming a writing habit so that you're eager to write every single day, or you're eager to write when you want to write. It's called How to Write Better, and this new class opens up February 26, 2024. Opens for 72 hours only. You can find all the details. Get on the mailing list over there at howtowritebetter.org. And while you're there, you can download my free ebook. It's called 15 Ways to Write Better. Even if you don't want to take the class, you can download that free ebook, and you'll read it in about half an hour, 45 minutes, and you'll walk away with literally 15 ways to improve your writing today. Alabama, before we get to our listener tip, we do this thing called FAMS. The first Friday of every month, Friday afternoon, Minimalist Zoom. We've collected some FAMS questions here from the chat. You can hop on a Zoom call with us every month if you're one of our Patreon subscribers. But right now, Alex has a question for us.
I find holding on to things like toys and clothes that my next child will grow into takes up more mental space for me than I thought. Any ideas on how to mentally let go of an item you're keeping just for when?
The pithy thing I have in mind is a clean slate is a terrible thing to clutter. And that's what's happened right here. You're in this place of a clean slate, and yet you've cluttered it by not letting go. There's it's like an inverse type of clutter. You didn't bring a bunch of new things in, but the things that are now obsolete to you, and they will be unobsolete in the future, but there's a period of time. Think about this. At night, after we make dinner and I do the dishes and I clean off the counters, I do that as opposed to saying, well, you know what? These counters are just going to get dirty again anyway. Why clean them off? These dishes are going to get dirty again anyway. Why wash them? Well, maybe it's time to wash these for a while, and then you'll repopulate with the things that you need. And by the way, when you do that intentionally, you bring the things in that are appropriate for the now, that not necessarily were just appropriate in yesteryear.
Yeah, when I see the mental space, it takes up more mental space than I imagine. I would do some thinking about what that looks like for you, because there are different ways that clutter can occupy mental space. One could be, for this situation, something like, when my next child uses this stuff, will they like it? Will the thing still be usable? Will they be fashionable? Or something like, I just hate the way they get in the way. I don't mind keeping them, but I'm tired of tripping over them or having to look at them. What is the kind of mental clutter that you're dealing with? Because there may be some room for creativity there, right? Like maybe there's a different way that I can store them so that they're not nagging me in the way that they once were. Or maybe there's some insight they're leading me to that might make me realize that letting them go and purchasing them later is the best move for me. But what is bothering you about them? Let's be specific about the mental space, write that down, and maybe that can give you some insight. Another thing is I would calculate exactly what I'm saving, because savings is one of those things that has such a strong appearance of virtue that it can always seem like it's a good thing, But when you start crunching the numbers, you realize, oh, it's not as valuable as I thought. And so if it turns out you're saving, let's say, $150 worth of expenses that you don't get to enjoy until 3 years when the next child grows into it, you might look at it in terms of the numbers and say, oh, that doesn't make sense for me. This headache isn't worth putting up with for that cost. Numbers have a way of being honest with us in a way that feelings don't always do. And so I would maybe try a couple of things like that to see if that gets me anywhere.
Alabama, what else you got for us?
Here's a minimalist insight from one of our listeners.
Hey, Josh, Ryan, TK, and everybody. I have a listener tip and minimalist insight. As the last 2 years, my life has really been blown up with expectations where I thought I'd be. My whole time in college, I thought I'd be a real estate investor because that's what my brother did, and that's what I thought I was supposed to do. But now that I've been living a more meaningful life, I've realized that the expectations that I set for myself don't actually fit me in this time in my life. I went to school for business, and now I'm actually finding a lot of joy going back to school for nursing and caring for people, and realize that there's still up and downs in that, but I'm encouraged to just start over in the new season that I'm in. And minimalism has really shown that to me over the last couple of years. It's shown me that I can have freedom to let go of a previous identity that no longer fits my place in life. Since then, I've sold the house that I bought when I was 20. I started renting with a friend and enjoy a much lower stress level in life. No longer wake up with anxiety about owning a house or what may go wrong with it. I realize that my mental sanity in this time in life is much more important than the image I project for others to see. I'd much rather be peaceful and calm within myself and live a life that looks kind of boring to others than be anxious and uneasy trying to project an identity, something that I don't really want to be. I hope that was helpful for you guys. And there's always a time for you to give up an identity that no longer suits you in this time in life.
All right, y'all. We'll see you on Patreon for the full 2-hour maximal edition of episode 431 with Dr. Ramani. And we're going to answer a bunch more questions like, when does self-care become narcissistic? What is the narcissism of small differences? What can I do about my narcissistic parents now that I am an adult myself? How do you accept and heal from a narcissistic co-parent who has turned your child against you? Plus, a million more questions and simple living segments, including a minimalist home tour from one of our listeners over on the Minimalist private podcast. Visit patreon.com/The Minimalist or click the link down in the description to subscribe and get your personal link so that our weekly Maximal episodes play in your favorite podcast app. You'll also gain access to all of our archives all the way back to episode 001. By the way, Patreon is now offering free trial, so test drive the private podcast for free for 7 days. Big thanks to Dr. Ramani for joining us today. You can check out her brand new book, It's Not You. And we'll put a link to this in the show notes, as well as her website and her YouTube channel. Her website links to all of her social media as well. Her YouTube channel is outstanding. If you like what we talked about today, you'll really enjoy what she does over there on her YouTube channel. And that is our minimal episode for today. If you leave here with just one message, let it be this: love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
Peace.
Every little thing you think that you need, every little thing you think that you need, every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.